Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, recorded live at TED Countdown in Brussels, we're joined by a founder of the Pacific Climate Warriors, a movement that has sparked a wave of environmental consciousness across the Pacific and beyond. Redressing the power imbalance in the climate narrative that has historically depicted Pacific Islanders as victims of rising sea levels instead of the climate leaders and change agents that they are. This week's guest is a filmmaker, podcaster, writer, photographer, facilitator and trainer from the Fiji Islands who is renowned for the famous saying, "We're not drowning, we're fighting." On how the Pacific Climate Warriors took back their story, here's Fenton Lutunatabua. Stay curious.
The Pacific Climate Warriors are a network of young Pacific folks from across the Pacific region. And actually over the last, I want to say like 5 to 7 years, we've looked at organizing Pacific folks in diaspora communities. So Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the United States. So the talk is about, the work that they do. A lot of the work that the Pacific Climate Warriors has done has really been to retell the world stories about our people in the face of this climate crisis. Oftentimes, everyone just looks at us as like poor, helpless people that need to be saved, which is, an incomplete truth. Obviously, we're on the front lines of this crisis, vulnerable to climate impacts, and we're also we're like artists and poets and like lawyers and accountants and organizers and campaigners. So we all have a sense of agency as well. And so, being able to retell the world those stories and paint a more nuanced picture of who we are. I think it was over a decade ago, 2013, 350.org had organized a youth climate conference called the Global Power Shift. And so that brought together, I think, at least 500 young people from around the world. And there was a delegation of about 12 of us from the Pacific Islands. And when we were there, like the only stories that we heard from folks outside of the region, the Pacific region, was like, oh yeah, we heard about like Tuvalu and Kiribati, and you're going to be like disappeared in like 10 years and you're going to be gone. It was like a very gloom and doom narrative, right? And like almost every single person that we spoke to just looked at us with like so much pity, and it came from a good place. There was like, they were like, they had empathy, but it was also very like disempowering. And then all of the, the articles that was in there and like news from all around the world was just like, in 20 years, islands will be gone forever. So I was like, dang, because it felt so untrue to so many of us who were like on island doing the work to like figure out like, what does resilience look like for us? How do we protect ourselves, coastal communities from saltwater intrusion, from sea level rise? What's the work that is required as neighbors, as communities to rebuild after a tropical cyclone without necessarily waiting for foreign aid, right? We all indigenous folks, we have like a traditional relationship to one another. So in times of a crisis, we lean on those traditional structures in order to get through a difficult time, right? So if a coastal community is completely battered by a Category 5 tropical cyclone, we have a traditional link and relationship to folks from, the mountains. And so we're able to trade like coconut for pigs so there's like all of these really incredible like food security measures and just, mechanisms that allow for resilience in ways that make sense to us that exist. So it was like we had this deep lived reality of what it means to be on island and what it means to like survive and thrive in the face of this climate crisis. And all of the stories that we saw about us, just it didn't it didn't fit, right? So we had to do a lot of like, how do we navigate like this big international narrative about our people, how to do the reconciliation and like all the reconciling that we need to do. And then what are the steps that we need to take to actually say, we're this and that. We're not binaries. It's not this or that, right? We're many things all at once. And that takes a lot of time. And so for us, relationality is so important. And a huge part of what it means to be a community organizer in the climate space is quite literally looking at the time and the effort and the intention that's put into building relationships with people. It's quite incredible to see just how much the network has grown. There's a lot of Pacific Island folks that are looking at ways in which they can show up for their island homes, both on island and in diaspora communities. They're looking for connectedness to like the sacred spaces that they call home, and what does it mean to be a steward of those islands and of those places and of those spaces. And, just like over the last year and a bit, as a network, we've said, okay, one of our key things was around like connecting the science to the realities and being like, there's obviously there's an obvious driver of the climate impacts that we're seeing in the islands, and that's obviously like the fossil fuel industry and the continued sort of efforts to put profit before people and communities. And so for over the last decade and a bit, we've been saying no to fossil fuels, keeping fossil fuels in the ground. And we're at a point right now where actually like, we also want to articulate and be clear on what we want to say yes to, right? We've been saying no for such a long time, but in the future world that we're visioning and we're building and we're moving towards, how do we start putting some language around that? And so a lot of there's this overwhelming sense now of we've sort of organized around the shared identity of the Pacific Climate Warriors, and we're sort of visioning now what it means to be a world builder, right? How do we sort of lay down our proverbial weapons and pick up the tools that we need to build the communities that is a representation of all our aspirations and all of who we are. And so it's exciting times. There's a lot of like community renewable energy projects that we're sort of thinking through on island. Yeah, currently one thing that is a forever source of joy is organizing and trainings. With 350.org, that is like one of our key things that we do is like, how do we pay forward the skills and the tools to as many people as possible? And we do that by equipping them via trainings, via organizing tactics. So that's always a constant for me, because that really is how you build community. That's how we've been able to build out the Pacific Climate Warriors, right? Is we meet them where they're at and they say, you are so leaderful and we need all parts of you to be in this movement, right? So we like, you can be an accountant, you can be a builder, you can be like anything. We need all parts of society to be part of this world that we're sort of building towards. So that's a constant source of joy for me. And the big one for me right now is my son, Anders. It really is like, when I became a parent, just your perspectives of the world changed so much. My sense of story sovereignty has like really grown. I think a lot about what are the stories that I want to leave behind for those that come after me. What are the stories that I want my son to like look to and be like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Because obviously, like, most Pacific Island nations were colonized, Fiji colonized by the British. So a lot of our stories of resistance and resilience was obviously robbed from us, right? And so we think about that a lot as like story sovereignty, the things that we need to leave behind for the generation that comes after us. And for me, that's a deep well of joy, right? Because I get to really be intentional with the things that I leave behind. And my son will become whatever he wants to be in this world. He might not even become an activist, and that's so cool. I just want to make sure that I'm leaving for him opportunities for him to access joy and really modeling that in intentional ways.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
Stay curious.